today we're going to be looking at equivalent fractions on a number line. So we have a number line, and we can look at that number line as our whole. So this number line is going to start at 0, and it's going to end at 1. So our whole for this first example is going to be 1. And I can split this into 4 parts, into fourths. And the way I could do that, since 4 is divisible by 2, I can first split it into half. And then I can split each half into 2 parts. So to give me a total of 4 parts. And it's always good to try to make each of these parts as equal as possible, because to have them be fractional amounts, they have to be equal parts. So I've split this number line into 4 parts. So now I can label each part. We know that the denominator of each of them is 4, because the 4 parts means fourths. So that's 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4. And 4/4 is equivalent to 1, because 4 divided by 4 is 1. So now we want to look at an equivalent fraction on this number line compared to another number line. So for example, let's choose 3/4. Let's find out what 3/4 is equivalent to. Here we draw another number line, the same exact size, and 1 whole. And this time I want to split it into eighths. I want to see if there is an equivalent fraction in eighths that's equivalent to 3/4. So 8 parts is divisible by 2, so I can split it into half. And then I know that each of these parts has to be split into 4 parts to give me a grand total of 8 parts. So 4 is also divisible by 2, so I can split that in half, and then split each of these into halves. Do the same thing over here. This needs to be 4 parts, so split it into half, and then split each of those into halves again. And then we're going to label our parts. We know these are eighths, so 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8. So is there an eighth that is equivalent to 3/4? There sure is. They line up. 3/4 is equivalent to 6/8 because they stop in the same location on the number lines. Now, what did we do thinking about the other video that I made about equivalent fractions and finding them by multiplying or dividing by some fractional form of 1? Did we multiply or divide by a fractional form of 1 to give us the equivalent fraction of 6/8? We multiplied. What did we multiply it by? 2 halves. Because 2 halves is really equivalent to 1. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So when we multiply fractions, numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. So 3/4 is equivalent to 6/8. Now let's take it a little bit further and look at if the fraction was larger than 1 whole. So I've got my number line again. This time my number line starts at 0 and it ends at 2. So that means that I have in the middle here, that is 1 whole, and I'm going to need 2 number lines. They've got to be the same to be able to compare those fractions. And instead of splitting into fourths, this time I'm just going to split into halves. So from 0 to 1, split that into halves. And then from 1 to 2, also split that into halves. And now we need to label these. And that's a little bit more complicated because our whole is greater than 1. So if I'm going from 0 to 1 and I'm counting by halves, I have 1/2, 2 halves, 3 halves, and 4 halves. And what do you notice about our whole number fractions here? That 1, 2 divided by 2 is 1. The 2, 4 divided by 2 is 2. Great. So now let's split this one into fourths. Divided into half. Each of these have to be split into 2 parts. Divided again. Divided in half. Now I've got each of my wholes split into fourths. So 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, 5/4, 6/4, 7/4, and 8/4. Looking at the wholes, 4 divided by 4 is 1. 8 divided by 4 is 2. So if we say, is there an equivalent fraction that is equivalent to 3 halves? These match up, therefore they're equivalent. Now, what do you notice about 3 halves? I hope you notice that this is an improper fraction, meaning that that numerator is larger than the denominator. So if we were to convert this into a mixed number, we want a whole number and a fraction. Remember what this line means, divided by 3 divided by 2. Or we can look at, here's my 1 whole. I have 1 whole plus 1/2. Let's see if that works. Does 3 divided by 2 give us 1 with a remainder of 1? 2 goes into 3 one time. I have 1 left over. That becomes my numerator, and my denominator is the number I divided by, so 2. Let's change our 6/4 into a mixed number as well. We know we have 1 whole, and we have fourths here. So this is 1 1/4, 1 2/4. And we're going to see if that works with division. 6 divided by 4. 4 goes into 6 one time. I have 2 left over. That becomes my numerator. My denominator is the divisor, the number I divided into that number. Therefore, 1 1/2 is equivalent to 1 2/4.